Hi, and welcome to today's episode of The Supporting Actor. I'm your host, Adrian Streeter, so let's jump right into it. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Supporting Actor. I'm Adrian Streeter, your host, and I'm looking forward to having our next guest on the show. One of the things that our podcast really focuses on is parents with children that may have a special need and or disability. But what happens when that child grows up to become a young adult? Today's episode is a very special episode. We have with us a young adult, Brandon Randolph, who is coming on to talk about his diagnosis of having ADHD as a young adult. Help me welcome Brandon to the podcast. Hey, Brandon.
Hello, hello,
How,
hello.
how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How about yourself? I'm glad to
I
be here.
am doing well. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule as a senior graphic designer to join us here on the Supporting Actors podcast. So,
Oh,
Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself and your diagnosis.
absolutely. So yeah, as I'm Brandon Randolph. I'm 31 years old. I work in the creative industry, which once you find out a little bit more about what I have to say, what it isn't wouldn't really be as much of a surprise. Yeah, I specialize in graphic design and marketing and whatnot, and yeah, I have ADHD, inattentive type. I can explain what that means later, but
Yeah.
it's for those who don't know ADHD. It just stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which kind of is a misnomer, honestly. Um, but yeah, that's a little bit about me. I'm sorry, and about the diagnosis as well. So I actually didn't even think um, ADHD is I say this ADHD is tricky because it didn't even occur to me that it's something I had. Um,
Mm,
I could have until I was well into adulthood, which is the case for a lot of people. I've heard several stories of people being diagnosed like at like 40,
wow.
and again, I'm not a doctor or licensed or anything, so yeah, I just want to put that disclaimer out there. So anything I say is just all anecdotal, all experience. Um,
Of course.
I think a big part of that is because ADHD is so comorbid, has such a high comorbidity rate with a bunch of other mental things as well. And just what comorbidity means is this occurs with this as well, or this causes this. So ADHD is comorbid with anxiety and depression, which basically means ADHD oftentimes causes anxiety and depression because generally with ADHD, and I get into a little bit later what what the symptoms are and what the symptoms are and what the ramifications of that are. But generally, it will leave you feeling like you're lazy or you can't do something or why can't I remember this or find this. It's a bunch of very different, it's a bunch of things that, more or less create a cycle of you feeling down on yourself, which can
Mm,
cause depression. And so when you go, eventually you go see, or if you're a younger child or a teenager, your guardian or parent takes you to see, a therapist or a psychologist from help, it's very easy to get diagnosed for depression or anxiety, completely missing the root cause, which is ADHD. And they'll treat the depression and anxiety, but that's like treating just the symptoms because they
wow.
don't realize that it's actually something a little bit more causing that. Um, and it was only honestly, ironically, regarding the diagnosis, I feel like the reason I was able to get diagnosed was because I had ADHD. Part of ADHD is you hyper focus.
Mm,
Get into that later, a little bit later as well. Onto various things you really can't control what you hyper focus on. But my hyper focus was when I realized found out ADHD was a thing. I hyper focused on ADHD itself, and that led me to um, you know, uh, doing all this research, realizing this does sound a lot like me. Um,
mm.
finding it took a a while to find a doctor who kind of specialized in it. I was assessed, and yeah, more or less they came back and was like, yeah, it sounds a lot like ADHD inattentive type.
Mm,
um, and I'll just say that too. There's three types. There's inattentive type, hyperactive type, which I think most people would, if most people think about ADHD, they think of hyperactive type, and then there's combination type, which is a combination of the two, which is what majority of people ADHD have. Inattentive type, you is more or less you have the hyperactivity in your mind. Hyperactive type is more so it's you see people
physical.
exactly, you see people who are physical, they have to be on the move and whatnot. And combination type is really a little bit of both. I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of both, but I definitely lean towards inattentive. Again, my that's just my experience and kind of my cursory way of explaining those things. So um, yeah, not a doctor, but just what I've my interpretation of what I've been learned and what I've learned and been told from the doctors I've and therapists that I visit and have seen and whatnot. So that's a little bit of background. So
Well, that's really cool. And yes, no one on this podcast is a doctor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. These are really sharing our personal experiences because oftentimes, especially in the African American community, I know that's been something that we've talked about on this podcast, particularly. Oftentimes, we don't want to see or accept or acknowledge, or we just don't know, and we don't know because it's not been something that's been prevalent or shared with us from the past.
right.
Um, so with that, what were some of the things or symptoms you were experiencing before your diagnosis that caused you to say, I think I may need to talk to someone?
Yeah. So I can I can rattle off a list. So in fact, that's what I'll do. So I'll give a list and then I'll kind of go down that list and give like a quick summary, like what that means, pretty much. So
Yeah.
symptoms I was experiencing, some of which I was aware of, and some of which I was like, I didn't even realize that I was doing that. I was experiencing that, but yeah, it does like me. So, problems with executive function,
Mm,
emotional regulation, hyperfocus, which I mentioned before, problems with attentiveness, issues with forgetfulness, which I didn't realize was something I had actually do struggle with, and time blindness, which kind of goes back into the hyperfocus thing. So starting off from the top, so executive function, all that means is that's your basically your ability to do things, like get
mhm,
things done, like your motivation. Um, when you more or less the chemical in your brain that kind of gets that started is dopamine. That's your reward chemical. So that's more. You could almost think of dopamine if you wanted to really simplify this. That literally it could be like the motive, your where motivation, that feeling comes from, and that reward as well. Like when you accomplish something, or something really good happens, or you worked really hard at something and you get that final payoff. Is that it's a boost of dopamine in your brain that you're like that makes you feel, oh, this is generally people with ADHD are deficient in dopamine, and so because of
really?
that, correct, yeah, and it's then that deficiency makes it very difficult to get started on things and follow through on things, and it is it can be very debilitating with a lot of things. It's just very difficult to be get stimulated or want to, and the thing is, it's almost like a duality because I always like to call it there's a will, but not a way. Because you physically want to do the thing. You
Mm,
just can't, you have to, it is very difficult. It's like pushing you have to, it's like almost trying to build up momentum almost. You have to get momentum, but you starting at zero.
yeah.
I don't know. I'll also say this. I'll use terms neurotypical and neurodivergent in lieu of like uh ADHD and normal, because I don't really think there's really a such thing as really normal. But I just say
Interesting.
when I say neurotypical, I'm just talking about, general people, how people would generally think. When I say neurodivergent, I mean like people with like neurodivergency, so in minds that tend to work differently. That's all I mean when I use
Mhm.
those terms. I meant to preface that earlier. So definitely problems with executive function, which just means like it's just difficult to get started with things or to follow through with things. And but moving on after that, there's issues with emotional regulation as well. So generally, people with ADHD feel emotions more intensely, all of them,
Mm,
than people who are neurotypical. And generally, those the way we feel emotions isn't congruent to the situation. A lot of the times, from my experience, my I guess I would call it my vice, I guess, or the emotion I feel the strongest probably would be anger. I mean, growing up and pretty much all my life, I've had like these really disruptive and explosive outbursts over in in hindsight, because that's another thing too. We're people with ADHD, when they're having these bursts of emotion, they're extremely vivid and cognizant. We know exactly what we're doing, saying, feeling, etc. We just can't stop it. It is such an overload of our the limbic system is kind of what controls a lot of that your your feelings of like fight or flight and that sort of thing, your limbic system, your amygdala, those sorts of things in your mind. Cortisol being another chemical that kind of floods your brain and kind of gets you to act. And ours is overactive and constantly, when we get into a state that's we're overstimulated or easily frustrated, um those parts of our mind kind of get hijacked and go haywire. So it's like we're still cognizant of what we're doing, but it's almost like we're not in the driver's seat when it comes to like our emotions. A lot of the times, I know me. I'm speaking, and I'll speak about me personally. Um, like when it comes to anger, so definitely emotional dysregulation, hyper focus. That's a big one. I think like that's probably one of the more well known things. People when people think about other people with ADHD is we can just easily hyper focus on like
mm,
one thing, which is ironic because it kind of contradicts the first thing I said about executive function. But the thing is, I could work. There's been time I've done it before. I could work on things for like 8 hours straight and just not even want to eat
oh, wow.
or go to the bathroom. It's just because it's like at the momentum, and a lot of it's because the momentum is high. And I knew how hard it was to get to this point where it's like I just will be so interested, I will continue to work. Or a rabbit hole, which got me into how I figured out about ADHD in general. It's real easy to get into rabbit holes about just silly subjects, and the people consider, and that's the part about ADHD where a lot of people consider it to be like a superpower, and some people, but I more so consider it to be a double-edged sword. Um,
Mm,
because again, I can't control necessarily what I hyper focus on. It's just something that catches my attention. If I could, then that would be different. And also, with hyper focus, it's more so helpful, when I think you might be younger, but when you're an adult, how often do you have 8 hours to just focus on
right, right,
one thing? Um,
right.
and just to real quickly wrap that up is forgetfulness. I'll walk into a room and just forget why I walked into that room to
I
get
think
whatever.
we all experience that though, Brandon.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, though. There's this actually a scientific reason I found that happens. Those transitional spaces,
Mm,
because usually we're always in our head too. So we'll walk into the room to get something. We're thinking about something else, and we transition to a new space, and that does something psychologically to people. That transition into a new space, and you get into that space, you get distracted by something else. So. Um,
mm.
and I'll walk in. There's been many times I walked into my bedroom to get like my phone, but I'll end up cleaning the bathroom somehow because I just know that just because I forgot that I came up there for the phone. Like it's just because that transition of it happens all the time. And then time blindness, which again, like I try to be very cognizant. I feel like I can talk forever about a lot of things, especially this topic. But time blindness and the hyper focus kind of go hand in hand. I literally, when I'm not exaggerating, 3 hours can feel like 30 minutes. Um,
Wow.
and I found that to be the case because when I'm working, I'll listen to a podcast that I know for a fact. I'll put it on because I want to listen to something. I know I'm working long. And I know for a fact this podcast is 2 hours and I'll be working and then it'll be wrapping up. And I'm like, what did they do? A short episode this time? And I'm looking, and I'm like, oh no, that was 2 hours. Huh. And it just doesn't feel like it. You just don't sense time,
Mhm.
I think, the same way, a typical person would.
Mm.
It just yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon that is, but it's something that I try my best to be cognizant of. So that's what I
Now,
was the symptoms were that I experienced. So go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
so what made you seek help for yourself? Like, did you go down a rabbit hole and you said, "Oh, this identifies," like, did you see Dr. Google and said, "These are my symptoms"? What made you decide to seek help for yourself?
Yeah. So the biggest thing I'd say that made me decide to seek help was because a lot of the symptoms I found, I always thought it was honestly that a lot of things are just part of that's just my personality. Because I mean, I remember I would get so mad at with friends. Like I remember they would call me my friends at school. They would joke. They would call me the bulk, which was Brandon Hulk, because I would just get so just upset over like nothing really.
Mm,
And it was almost, and it didn't hurt my feelings or anything. It was almost like I wouldn't say a rite of passage or anything, or endearing, but it was just like a little joke. But stuff like sorry, that's my alarm that I set to remember to stop talking and move on. But yeah, so I actually did good because that was for the previous question. Um but but in terms of what made me want to seek is because I realized a lot of the things that I was experiencing did not serve me and were becoming a nuisance or negative to my adult life. In my teenage years and childhood, they weren't so much as an issue because hey, I was always surrounded by people who love me unconditionally, and hey, I didn't have to go to work. And deal with the bureaucracy of working corporate
mm,
America, and that sort of thing. Um, so problem, and so when you are trying to be adult, uh, when you forget things and then you can't be attentive, or you try to hyper focus and you're emotionally dysregulated, that becomes those become issues like
mm,
really
mm,
quickly. When as a kid, I mean, those are, I wouldn't. Those it's just, you more so just look at that. It's just how I am, or you'll grow out of this, da da da. Well, I didn't grow out of it, so it's just like I felt like, well, something's obviously going on. And for the longest time, I mean, it was like I mentioned, I would always be getting, uh, oh, you're depressed, which was true. I did have depression, do have depression, anxiety, but those were not. If you treat the depression, anxiety, you're not treating the real thing. It's not. You're just treating a symptom. You need to. I found when I found out ADHD was comorbid, which means can cause the two.
yeah.
That's when that was one of the things that really convinced me, kind of got me serious into like seeking it out, because I was like, wow, wait a minute, hold on now. Um, and and I did start to find once I took action to treat and manage the symptoms of my ADHD, yeah, I didn't feel depressed anymore or as anxious because
Wow.
the ADHD in and of itself, because of, in school, you don't pay attention. So you're really bad at tests. And, I always draw on tests. I just like to draw. You're so understimulated because, again, your brain is dopamine deficient. You're just always understimulated, and so you're always just trying to do something to keep yourself entertained. And like in school, you're bored, so you draw. So you find an avenue that will keep you engaged. And that for me, that was drawing and writing. So I mean, I keep it as a joke, but I have so many like tests that are just failed. That's just F's. But if you turn it over, you'll see drawings on the back. So
Mm,
it's and so I think that just shows, not all kids too, to break it out into, children, like not all children, just learn the same way. And I don't know if, at least back when I was going into school, I mean, we were all taught the same way, but it just doesn't, it never resonated with me at all. If I had to really, I could name a couple of teachers that grabbed my attention and I was fully attentive, to them 100% of the time, like because they really had my attention with what they were saying, but it was really rare. And so, and going through things like that, looking back and then looking at hindsight at things like that, then, you're an adult now and you have to pay bills and remember all to do these things and remember to
yeah,
keep things maintained
yeah,
and, remember to eat. It's like even something you think you have to. It's like you have to have things in order. And there's certain ways you just can't act. That's not
mhm,
acceptable. It is that really that kind of got me, on that path to, seek help for myself. And Yeah, definitely, yeah, it's just and that took the form of seeking a doctor first, but then I learned that you need it needed to be a specific specialist
mhm,
because um the therapist I see now also has ADHD. And that's very important just because not just the empathy aspect, but
yeah,
a lot of things with ADHD, to people who are neurotypical just sound insane. Like, why can't you just, why are you just, it just seems like it really does sound like if I tell you, like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't do this, or it's hard for me to do this, or, it's difficult for me to do this. Um, it just sounds like excuses. It really does just sound like excuses to people. Like, why, like,
mhm,
when in reality, no, in my brain, there is the gas that makes me go is not there right now. I can't do it. No, I want to. I physically cannot do it. I have to find some way around um,
yeah,
it to happen. And I think that's for people, like neurotypical people, who interact with people with ADHD or know they have ADHD. It's hard a hard concept to grasp, especially in society. When all we promote happiness in a lot, and and pushing forward and motivation. You can do it, and this and that, never giving up. And we push that a lot, and you feel, and you're someone who can't necessarily do that. You can see where that depression will start to fall in from that because you feel like, well, why am I incapable? Well, you're
yeah.
not. You're not. It's literally something. It's your mind just works differently. That's all it is. But a lot of times we don't know that. So that's what I was saying.
In my research in preparation for our conversation, one of the things that I learned was young children
Mm-hmm.
who have either a diagnosis or an undiagnosis case of ADHD tend not to do well in math and
Mm-hmm.
reading subjects because there's that focus that needs to happen.
Right.
So, how did I know you kind of spoke to some of the things that your friends called you.
Mm-hmm.
Did your experience or did you experience these things during your childhood? And if so, how did you deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, definitely experienced them during my childhood. Didn't realize I was experiencing it because to me it was just again how I was. I just thought it was just how it was, just how I didn't think it was any different or anything like that. Fortunately, I didn't. I don't remember facing any ramifications. But in hindsight, for example, like in elementary school, and my mom would tell you, because she was also a teacher at like the elementary school I'd gone to. I remember getting in trouble. Um, I don't remember what I did, but I remember my mom was very unhappy with the teacher. I remember getting in trouble for something. Maybe I couldn't sit down, or maybe I was fidgeting. I don't remember exactly what I did, but I knew it was something related to me being bored, because that was the biggest thing for me in a lot of schooling was I was just bored. And I used the word bored, but really the word I should use was understimulated. Again, going back to that dopamine, though usually children with ADHD, they just have um, a lot of energy, and it's the things that the curriculums in school or whatever they're doing in school, it's just not enough to um, adequately get them out, get it out. It's very common for a child that is hyperactive to grow up into an adult that is inattentive because I
Right.
still have the hyperactivity. I just don't need to be jumping off the walls and whatnot. And so I the the symptoms that kind of showed themselves another example I can give too is, I mean, in classes, I remember I just be in school and just be sitting in class. I don't remember being fidgety or anything of that nature or anything, but I remember I would just need to do something else. So I remember I took out a notepad and I would just start writing, just writing things, which ironically, I mean, I was in second grade. That's the furthest back I can remember. And I was writing because I needed something else to stimulate me.
Yeah.
Um, and in writing and doing that, it was actually able to help me sort of pay attention more to what the teacher was saying, which I'll get into why that was. Because I have two examples of why that happened. But in writing and it stimulating me, initially it just be a notepad. I just started writing stuff, and I just started writing like little stories, just making stuff up, just writing stories. And I think that kind of solidified later in my, as I grew up, like that's why I gained the love of writing because the first kind of, I guess, way of I wouldn't say self medicating, but kind of managing, not being, stimulated enough or involved enough, one, it being something to do, um, just to keep my mind, focused on something. And I say focused on something because another bit in my childhood that I can bring up, which again I think my mother will laugh at now, but I totally, in hindsight, look back and I was like, oh, that's why. So
Mhm.
I'll say this. So before I get into the story, I'll explain. So with the generally with the ADHD brain, it's you can think of it kind of like it's overclocked. If a neurotypical brain or a neurotypical brain was functioning at 100%, that's the highest it can go. An ADHD brain can go to 150, 200%. It's overclocked a lot, all
Mhm.
overclocked. And you would think, well, oh, doesn't that make you? Wouldn't that make you like? That's why
A
they say
genius.
power. Like, yeah, exactly. But actually, it makes us frustrated because it'd be like putting a Hemi in a Honda. Like you don't, it's too much. It is too much. That's why we get very overstimulated, agitated easily. Our minds are constantly churning in these ideas and I just thoughts out very quickly, randomly, just da, 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 just it is such a constant bombardment of just everything all at once, all the time is kind of the
Hard
same.
to focus.
And exactly. And so going back to those figures, so I remember I was writing for school. I was in high school. I can't remember. I think it was in ninth grade. Had to write a paper, and my mom knew I had to work on a paper. But at the same time, I used to be addicted to this online video game, and I would play it all the time. After school, I would be online playing this game, and I remember my mom would come in and check on me to make sure I was writing the paper. And I was working on the paper, but I'd be playing the game at the same time. And she'd be like, what are you doing? Like, how is it you need to be working on the paper? Da, da, da. I finished the paper and I remember she wanted to read it and she was shocked because it sounded really good. It was really well written. And I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, well, of course it is. I write like because at this point, I've been writing for years. I mean, but at this point, I was thinking, of course it does sound good. But in hindsight, what was happening was the game was allowing me to focus on the paper. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is so and oh my brain being I say overclocked. Say it was at 150%. It's really hard to focus. So if I was only focused on the paper, which doesn't stimulate me, it's going to be very difficult to write that paper because my mind is thinking about other stuff. It's just moving too quickly. However, when I started playing the game at the same time, what would be a distraction to somebody else, it dropped that 100 to like that 150 to like 100 to 90. It took up some of it. So now I can focus on the paper too. So I could do both of them. But the paper was easier to write now because I was playing this game at the same time. And that's
Right.
why in school, when I would write and be writing my stories, I feel like it made it easier to pay attention because my brain, it was my, again, with that overclocked analogy, you're using some of that energy into something else so the rest can be used. You can use what you need to focus. And that's the best way that it was kind of explained to me, and it totally made sense. And it kind of makes sense of why I do a lot of the things that I do that most people would think, doesn't that distract you? But no, it helped. And I think to a neurotypical person it would be, because like if you were writing a paper and try to play a game,
Too much.
it'd be like, what? I can't focus on the paper. That doesn't make any sense. But it took up, but like I said, it took up enough of that brain space, that extra. You don't really need this, and your mind is just overthinking this. It put it into something else, so I could focus on what I really wanted to, and I was able to write the paper. Um, in hindsight, and I was just thinking, well, no, I just write really well. Which I mean, I felt like I did, but no, that was what was going on there. That's why I think I truly believe that's the real reason I was able to do that, is because of what would be seen as a distraction was helping. So there were a lot of instances like that in my childhood, and I'd say that's kind of how I managed it. Which is, I didn't even realize I was managing it. I
Mm.
was kind of doing things that I felt like, well, this will make this easier, or make me feel better, sort of thing. Because I, at the time, again, I didn't realize, what might have been going on in my head. I didn't really fully understand it. I was just trying to, you know, um,
Well, I will say this for our audience who don't know. So Brandon is my nephew,
yeah,
and one of the things that um, Brandon was the first male born into our family. And so when Brandon was growing up, I remember Brandon having all this energy. And I remember Brandon would jump off of things and land on his knees. And I would just be like, oh my God, he's going to bust his kneecaps. But it was that energy that he had. And we, being a family of a lot of females, we didn't recognize the signs because we just thought, oh, he's being a little boy. That's what little boys do.
mhm,
Because your energy was out the roof. It was just beyond anything that I knew from, babysitting. I was like, Brandon has a lot of energy.
I heard.
Um,
Remember the
so I
story?
will say, looking back, as his aunt, I could see now, obviously, again, being in it, we don't know. We didn't know. We didn't know what no ADHD was. We didn't, that wasn't something that was discussed in our community. That wasn't something that was on the forefront of our minds. It was, this is a little boy and he's being a boy. He's doing stuff that we guess boys do. So that is my perspective of Brandon and his energy and all of the things that he's talked about in his personality, from childhood to adulthood. With that being said, Brandon, my question to you next is, what advice would you give our audience members who may be having some symptoms, whether they are a child or a parent or a guardian who um, are noticing the types of things that we're discussing here, but aren't sure what to do, or if they are a young adult and they're struggling with some of the things that you are discussing and seeing these things in themselves. I
Yeah.
will preface that statement by saying Brandon nor I are medical professionals. And if you do see any similarities in yourself, we do ask that you seek a professional to get a professional diagnosis. That's not what we're here for. We're just asking Brandon from his experience what symptoms or what advice from his experience would he give our audience?
It's funny you say that because you just answered the question. You already provided the answer. That's what I was about to. That's exactly my first. If you're, I would say if you're, especially if you're a parent, because I can come join this with you guys' experiences with me as a child. If you're a parent and you think I have my child. He seems very hyperactive, jumping off the wall. All it's crazy. All the stuff that with comes with that level of energy. Yeah, I definitely. And you think that it's abnormal, I'd say, or neurodivergent, or because I mean, I think in general, just kids just having an immense amount of energy, which I miss. I'm not gonna lie, I wish that was. But the biggest thing is, yeah, I would, seek, a professional help. If you're a parent, I would, start at your primary healthcare, provider, and see it and get referred to a specialist. Maybe get your child, because there's you know, like tests and things that they'll run to really narrow things down, to see hey, is this something that's normal? I don't know, 'cause that's the thing, because I think a lot of times it's especially in children, because they won't sit still or this and that, will immediately think they must have, ADHD, and we need to get them on, some kind of Ritalin and this and that. And
Mm,
to an extent, I do think medication can be helpful, but I'm actually kind of grateful. I don't know for sure. Like, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm sure that I know medications that are safe for children, but you know, I growing up in those developmental years, I'm not sure. It's so many different um, ways that certain medications can affect developing mind. So I think back, because I would hear the stories about me being well, and I was kind of actually grateful that I didn't have any medication necessarily as a child when I was really really young, because that maybe that may have affected. Again, I'm not sure, because it was, like I said, it was the '90s, so who knew?
yeah.
No one knew anything, and it may have affected, how I, my mind as it was developing. Um, and so by seeking, that professional help with your child, there are ways, there are ways to, you know, um, remedy symptoms, you know, with or without medication. Medication does help, but I mean, a lot of times it is just situational. Or I think with ADHD, we can accomplish the same things. You just need a different path.
Mm,
Just in the same way, like some people can read something and know it, but some people need to be shown something, know it.
mhm,
I kind of
mhm,
feel like it's the same thing. Like I said, like in school, we teach the same way, but not every child learns the same. And so,
exactly.
um, so my advice for that is, definitely seek, a licensed, doctor, and if you can, a specialist.
Yeah.
Um, as an adult, I feel like it might be a little bit more challenging, because ADHD, I found for a lot of for I guess I understand it, but generally a lot of stuff we'll find online is children. You have to type in adult ADHD. It
Mm,
seems to be like a child neurodivergency, but it's like it doesn't go anywhere. Like the child grows up.
yeah.
Just like just like you said, it's strange. I'm not sure if there's in terms of, like, say, other things like autism. I don't know if, like, I think if you I can't say this for sure, so I might be proven wrong, but I think if you search for autism, I think it comes up adult, children, everything. I'm not
Mm,
sure if you have to type in adult autism. You probably do. You might have to, but I know for a fact with ADHD, if you just type in ADHD, you're gonna get a lot of things. And this is coming from the perspective as you're an adult or a young adult with ADHD. You're gonna get a lot of things that are just targeted towards parents trying to help their children with
mm,
ADHD, which can be frustrating to you, because you're like, no, I don't need that. I'm the parent, or I'm the adult. So
yeah.
in that instance, I would say you would, again, the diagnosis is the most important thing, because you can't, it opens up a lot more avenues for you to get help. It opens up, you can get medications that can help you, because I mean, all the medications that help with ADHD are controlled substances. Um, and so you can get medications. You can, that your specialist will be able to help you specifically with the symptoms, because not all people with ADHD have the same symptoms, but they can help you specifically with the symptoms that are targeting you. Whereas if you're just seeing, a therapist that is helping you with helps with general things like, common things like anxiety or depression or whatnot, you a lot of it might not work for you simply because your mind doesn't um adhere to that. I know me personally, there's a lot of books that I'll read, whether it be self-help or a lot of videos that I'll watch to, trying to find, hacks for productivity,
Mhm.
how to be more
Mhm.
productive, this and that. And um, a lot of the things you'll hear, the assumption is you're neurotypical. You won't realize, you'll try things and you'll fail. You'll do exactly the advice that you heard and you'll fail. And you'll be like, well, and it'll make you feel bad. But the thing is, you're not realizing your mind isn't tailored to do it the way that a lot of things that isn't tailored to do it the way that you're hearing it. You can do the thing, but you have to do it a different way. I
Yeah.
know that sounds kind of strange, but I like, for example, regimens and routines and such like that. Like it could just be difficult for a mind that is constantly seeking some sort of stimulation. You just have to find a different way to accomplish that. And generally, a lot of advice, self help, and things like that are tailored towards people who are neurotypical, which you're not neurotypical. So having a doctor that understands that and can hone in on your specific areas that um, you struggle with and can help with those, I think is very important. Because I mean, I think with ADHD, it's just vital to be able to pinpoint it, the things that you struggle with, so you can find actionable steps of what to do about it. Because it's not going anywhere. You're gonna have ADHD for the rest for your
Right.
life. So and you just so and which is you just find ways to, and that's it's not there's nothing wrong with that. It's just your path will just not, you have to, if there's a path, I look at it like, if there's a path that, hey, everybody has walked on to get to this place, and you can see the trail and it's been walked on a lot of times, but you're like, well, every time I try to walk on a trail I keep tripping. Well,
Mm.
there's another path over there that's a little bit bushier and you might need a machete and there's some thorns and stuff, but that's the path you gotta take. It's a little bit tougher of a path, but you're still gonna get, and it's windy too, so it's longer. But you're still gonna get to that place too. It's just gonna be a little bit more. You just have to go through a little bit more because you can't go the neurotypical way just because your mind just doesn't work like that. So um
I
find that.
love that analogy.
Right. Yeah, that's just how, exactly. Thank you. That's just how I've always seen it. And that's what I would say. And another thing too about finding help, because a lot of people, it's because I can get into what I want when we ask when we get into our resources, but prior to that, just going, I think going on YouTube, there's a lot of channels, and there's channels that have, like, they have to have, they're certified to talk about this subject. You'll see a little badge at the bottom of the videos, so you know that it's that this person is certified to talk about whatever they're talking about. Um,
Right.
they give a lot of insight on how the ADHD mind works, all types of it, and how, and tips on how to manage those certain things. Um, they give you can again they give you can it's ways you can almost self-diagnose, but I don't like the term self-diagnose. It's ways that if you think you might have ADHD, there's so many resources on in videos that people who are licensed to talk about the subject. They'll ask questions, and if this sounds like you might have it. They can't diagnose you, but it can give you the push you need to be like, hey, well, maybe I need to go find a a specialist to see if there is a diagnosis. Because I mean, if there is a diagnosis, like I said, I think the most important thing that can get you help, because once there's the diagnosis, then there's something that can be done about it. You know about it, you're aware of it. And I mean, I guess it's like they said, knowing is half the battle. GI Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting, Brandon, because some of the things that you do, and even you've done in this podcast where you set a timer to kind of keep yourself within a framework.
Right.
You do these things to keep you um, in alignment. And I know that in third grade, I was diagnosed with dyslexia. So I'm dyslexic. And I would get my B's and my D's and my P's and my Q's and my S's and my C's backwards. And to this day, I still have to play some of those games in my mind,
Mhm.
like even left and right. I'm in my 40s and I have to hold up my fingers sometime to say which side is left, which side is right. If I'm looking at a D or a B, I have to say um which my second letter in my name is AD, so I know the direction of the D, and I'm like, oh well, this looks different from the D that's in my name, so that means it's a B. So I have
Right.
to still to this day play games in my own mind on the things that I learned when I was going through um my diagnosis of having uh dyslexia. But Brandon, before we let you go, I have one last question. You have been so gracious to give your time to our audience. Um, are there any organizations and or resources, because you kind of talked about it a little bit, that
Mhm.
you have found valuable that you can share with our audience?
Absolutely. So I'd say the biggest one that I've gotten value from, and I think it's probably the biggest, honestly, is Chad. That's CHADD.org. And that stands for Children and Adults with Attention Deficit slash Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a giant organization that provides education, advocacy, support for individuals with ADHD and their families. So it's for everybody. So with Chad, um, it's a resource for, like I said, everybody, parents, loved ones, the people with ADHD as well. They have seminars, they have podcasts, they do a lot of things, and they have sectors scattered throughout the United States.
Mm.
Like meet where you can go to, like, support groups and such. Anybody can go. I think it's the and they have a wealth of resources as well of what of things, like, not just of, like, things to how to identify it in children, how to, like I said, go about, finding, the right doctor, how to just the wealth of things. And one of the biggest things that I advocate for them too is they help you find in your area specialists that are for ADHD. That's how I found the doctor that I go to, or the therapist that I go to, that specializes in ADHD, who also has ADHD. They'll and not just that, they also have, not only will they identify specialists, but they'll identify coaches as well, ADHD coaches. So
Oh,
there are
nice.
the difference between a ADHD psychologist and a coach is a psychologist will help you identify, that, what your the things that trigger you, what causes your ADHD, what educates you on what's happening in your mind, to, because the more you know, the more you can, do something about it, regulate it, that sort of thing. What a coach is going to help you do, that's what a doctor, more so a psychologist, is going to do. What a coach is more so going to do, they don't really care much about how you got here. They're going to look at what goals do you want to have, and they're going to help you achieve them with
Nice.
your ADHD. That's what they're doing. It's not important how you got here, da da da, you went through this, da da, okay, we get all that. What you want to become, what you want to be. Oh, you want to finish this book. Oh, you're trying to start a business, but you're worried about, entrepreneurship and your executive function. It's hard for you to start. Well, this is what we're gonna do. And they'll give you ways to help you hold accountable, help you stay, motivated, help you, deal with, the symptoms that you might feel are holding you back.
Yeah.
Um, So that's kind of the difference between a coach and a therapist. The and I will say this too in regards to that: a therapist generally is covered by health insurance. A coach generally is not. So
Okay, good to know.
that's something to keep in mind. So with coaching, yeah, you probably have to come out of pocket and pay. And I think it's well worth the money, especially if you found a very good coach. And they generally offer free consultations anyway, so you can see if this is something or someone that you think you can mesh with, and that can help you. And they have to be certified too. So there's all sorts kinds of certifications. But again, with a therapist, you can go through your there's a lot of different avenues. You can go through your insurance. There's I think it's AEP. I probably got that acronym wrong, but it's just pretty much you get free sessions to see if you mesh with your therapist and whatnot. But that's the
Well,
biggest. Sorry, go
well,
ahead.
no, no, no. What we will do is we will add the link for Chad and the other link that you just mentioned once we confirm what it is in
Perfect.
the description so that our audience members will have access to it. I didn't mean to cut you off,
No, you're
Brandon.
fine. You're fine. That's just I was wrapping up anyway. That's perfect. I'm glad you add the links because I think if especially for people who really aren't sure what to do, because I mean that's what ADHD, you feel stuck a lot because
Mm,
you want to but I just physically I just don't have the motivation to, and it's like, well, make it as easy as possible, click this link and then boom, you're taken to a page that has all these resources. YouTube channels, the two that I could recommend off the top of my head that I would trust the most,
mhm.
one is called How to ADHD, and she I don't quite remember her name, but she has been doing videos for years about the topic. She herself has ADHD. She talks about the symptoms. She gives a lot of good analogies, and her channel is tailored towards both parents um, of children with ADHD and adults with ADHD. So
Good.
she has both. Um, and it's funny because her channel, she just has this really wacky style of like how her videos are. But it's very insightful, and she really goes into the science of why the mind works like this, which I think is important for people to understand because um, if ADHD is an invisible, I mean, most like any mental thing, it's an invisible.
Yeah,
You can't see it, and so
yeah.
one you get, like I said, so we'll get overstimulated easily, and so there's certain things like, well, you know your limits. I'm sorry, I can't do this. I can't do this right now. There's so much going on. I can't do this. But people generally will forget that you have ADHD, and it's easy to get labeled as lazy or you're not motivated or this and that. But at the same time, if I was a paraplegic and we came up to a set of stairs, you wouldn't look at me and be like, wait, after you? Like, I'm in a
Right,
wheelchair. Yeah,
right,
I can't climb these steps. And
right.
it's more or less the same thing, but you can't see it because it's in my head. Um,
Mhm,
and she explains, like I said, those talks about dopamine and those different parts of the brain. A lot of that stuff I learned from How to ADHD. That's the name of the channel. And then there's another YouTuber. Her name is Dr. Tracy March. She is actually a doctor, number one. And so she's certified. She talks not just about ADHD. She talks about a ton of mental health subjects. And the reason I like her is she's also a woman of color.
oh,
Um, and
good.
yeah, her videos are very insightful, very powerful. She goes into the details of the why, not only the why, but the what you can do about it as well. And like I said, it's sure her topics range from everything from bipolar, BPD, ADHD, or depression, or just simple things that maybe not even are just how to keep yourself motivated, how to just it's so many topics that she's talked about just from her years of being um, a certified either psychologist or psychiatrist. I'm not really sure, but I know she's a doctor of a mental health specialist. So those are the two I'll recommend just to anybody who just you just want to see like if you want to just learn more about the topic in general, or you want to maybe say, hey, am I like this, or understand somebody, for a fact there's somebody in your life who does have ADHD, and
Mhm.
you just want to understand it. you just want to understand it more. Those are two very good channels that we can link, like I said, in the description as you mentioned. So those would be my three: Chad.org, and in terms of YouTube, How to ADHD, and Dr. Tracy Marks. By far, I think two really big contributors to that the community and helping in terms of mental health. So.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours,
Absolutely.
but
And I
I
hope
just
I'm talking too fast as well. I try to keep my talking speed. I didn't mean to interrupt. I realized I hope I wasn't talking too fast as well.
you
If I
did.
was, just put the video in 0.5 speed or something, 0.75. Slow it down a little bit. I'd have been.
No, you were fabulous. Well,
So
thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing your journey with our audience. We will link all of the resources that Brandon mentioned in our conversation. And so, Brandon, we wish you all the best. And if there's anything that the Supporting Actor podcast can do for you, you let us know. Thanks
absolutely.
for being a guest, my friend.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is a pleasure, and it's an honor to definitely be here. So absolutely, I'm glad to. I love what you're doing,
Oh,
and
thank you.
what the podcast is doing, and it's a no brainer for me. So thank you for inviting me on and letting me contribute. So
Well, maybe we'll have you on again in the future. Take care, Brandon.
thank you, you as well.
Well, thank you all so much for joining this week's podcast with Brandon discussing his diagnosis of ADHD. Again, if you have a loved one or you yourself may be struggling with some of the things that we discussed here, we first and foremost recommend that you do seek out professional assistance, but there will be some links available in our description. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our content as we will be releasing new content on a weekly basis through this season. Until we see you at the next podcast, have a good one. Take care. Bye.